So Sharon Bachman is our next speaker and our last speaker before the lunch chats. She is the agricultural and natural resources educator for Cornell Cooperative Extension in Erie County. And she's going to talk about, again, gardening success. That is the whole point of this. Resistant varieties, seed starting, buying transplants, and weed ID tools. Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Betsy. Does that look okay from your end?
It looks great. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So as Betsy said, I'm Sharon Bachman, and I've got a number of topics to cover in our short amount of time, but it's been great so far. So thank you for having me. And as Betsy just mentioned, I work with CCE Erie, and I also work with our Master Gardener program. Sorry. Get used to our buttons here. So what I will cover, I always like a little roadmap. We're going to focus in on this top bullet, mainly the vegetable varieties for gardeners in New York State, focusing on disease resistance. How do we know what varieties to choose for New York State? Hopefully many of you already know the answer to that. A little bit on seedling success, looking at our seed packets, what information do those give to us? When we get our seeds or transplants ready, how do we set those out? How do we take care of them? Selecting our transplants, and then there's a little tabling event or commercial of mine at the end. We're going from vegetable plant resistance to some weed resistance at the very end. So then I'll be closing it out for questions before our lunch break. So the Tale of Two Gardens, these are two urban gardens in the city of Buffalo. They both had tomato plants. They were doing well. And then something happened. The melting there is a little foreshadowing. They were getting their blossoms, getting ready to set fruit. And then some weather events moved in.
Hey, so can you share at the end?
I hear a little bit of noise in the background.
So Gemma I think is asking a question.
What was that?
I thought Gemma was asking you a question, but I'm not hearing it. So I'd say keep going. Oh, yep, she muted herself again. So I think you're okay, Sharon. Thanks.
Okay. So this little storm event, something happened in the garden. And then our nice tomato plants that had set some nice green tomatoes. One garden looked like the side with the red mulch, nice tomatoes, they're getting ripe. And the other side was showing some disease issues. So I think if we have a poll ready to go, I'm wondering if people have ideas what happened here. Why did one garden do okay after our storm moved through, and why did one not?
I think they're working on getting that posted.
Okay.
At least I'm not seeing it yet.
Yeah, I'm not seeing. And people can chat in ideas if you have them.
Yep, we've got one in there already in the chat.
Excessive moisture made it prone to fungal disease. I like that. Splashing up from the ground.
Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Thank you, Kim or Gemma.
There we go.
So you can vote on the questions. Yep, we're getting some. All right, thank you.
Yep, we see the right answer coming in there, that there was the resistant variety here. So, and some are selecting choice one. And if you know about late blight, and that's a possible answer too, but these were both in the same general geographic area, so they would have been exposed to the same things. So resistant varieties is the right answer. Thanks, everybody. And Joyce says late blight in the chat. Thank you. So as we talk about finding resistant varieties, I was thinking of our disease triangle, and we really need three pieces to actually have a disease take hold. And these resistant varieties, the tomato crop on the left-hand side, offer us a tool in the toolbox to prevent disease from damaging our yields of our crop. So in this case, the pathogen likely came in with the storm. The environmental conditions were right. We had heat and humidity, and then we've got the setup for our late blight disease, as folks mentioned in the chat. Thank you. And I think if we have my second poll there, we can put this one up. When we think of this disease triangle, what pieces of this can we control? Can we control all three of those pieces? Maybe one of those pieces by picking susceptible crops? What do folks think on that one? And so if you're growing in a greenhouse, maybe a pathogen like late blight you can keep out because you've put a barrier there. So that's one of our IPM tools, right? And this is actually one of the pre-test questions, because I did take the pre-test. But when Betsy asked me the right answer, I think 26 or the last choice is kind of the best choice. It depends on the crop and the pathogen, because sometimes you can pick susceptible host crops, sometimes you can't. So we can go on from that poll. Thank you, everybody.
I like the fact that no one chose presence of the pathogen.
So as we mentioned, resistant cultivars are a tool in our toolbox. This is a list from Penn State in regards to what we can do to prevent disease. And this is on my list of resources at the very end. We're not going to go into the lower bullet points, but we want to look at this resistance. I think Steve Reiners for setting this up, talking about plant breeding in GMOs. The resistance that our plants have in tomatoes actually comes from a wild variety that exists in South America. So as Steve said, there's plant breeding, back crossing to get the varieties that we use in New York that have resistance. And some don't have a strong resistance, and we note those as tolerant. So we're going to look at this resource, the selected list of vegetable varieties for gardeners in New York State. If there's Master Gardener volunteers here, which I'm sure there are, you might participate in a citizen science research project contributing data to this. So it's a great resource. It's on Cornell Garden-Based Learning. You can go there to check out the full resource. We're just going to look a little bit into the tomato section today. So what you're going to find when you open up that list of varieties is this notation chart at the very beginning. And I've highlighted here, everywhere where we see resistance, there's a number of crops that have resistance kind of bred into them. So we're not going to focus on the ones that I haven't circled, but there are a number of different things here, from rust resistant to scab and mosaic resistant to Stewart's wilt notation. But we're focused in on the late blight there, circled in red on the left-hand side. And then there's a few other tomato diseases that plants have some resistance to, and that's Fusarium, the root knot nematode, tolerance for tobacco mosaic virus, and then also verticillium. Oops. So, okay. Okay. You'll also notice in that chart that we just looked at, there were some asterisks and some number signs. And the number signs is something that's new to the variety chart this year. And the asterisks are ones that have a rating of 3.5 or higher from 4 or more gardeners. So it's important just to see the little details. I've highlighted the resistant ones here. There's 3 cherry tomatoes with resistance. You can see Jasper is a variety there that has some stacked resistance for late blight, early blight, a disease that overwinters in the soil, and then also the Fusarium. So this isn't even the complete tomato section. The heirloom section actually continues on another page. I just shortened it for the purposes of this presentation. So moving on to seedling success quickly. So we've already talked about how to select varieties. We're going to take a little look now at what information is on our seed packages. There's a wealth of information, so don't rush through and not read those carefully as you get ready to plant your plants. And it also helps us to determine whether it's something we should start inside or sow directly outside. So these are just a couple more tips in terms of seed starting indoors. And we'll talk about these. So a common crop chart is a handy tool. This one is from the Seed to Supper manual, but this helps us know which ones can be transplanted or seeded directly outside. So row or banded are those that go directly outside. We're going to look at this in a little bit different format, but largest seeded, or those that we eat the root of, are usually those sown directly outside, where some of those crops that maybe originated in warmer areas, it's good to have them started indoors to give them that little boost before we set them outside in our New York conditions. So these are some of our direct seeded crops: the radishes, beets, peas, zucchini, a few of our leaf lettuces, garlic, all kind of makes sense, all kind of intuitive. The potatoes there, we could start potatoes inside, but really hard to transplant. So best to just do that outside when the soil temperature is right for that crop. These are either or. So some in our beet family that we eat the leafy greens, the chards and the spinach, some herbs, some in our cabbage family, and also lettuces. And then these are the crops that we want to think about starting inside: the tomatoes, the hot peppers, the bell peppers, tomatillos, eggplant, pumpkins, and melons. Really need that few weeks indoors before they get started outside. So this is a seed packet, also from the Seed to Supper materials. We're going to focus in on the certain area of that seed packet where it says 6 to 8 weeks before your average last frost date. So you want to have a good resource. Usually, as a master gardener, you've probably heard this somewhere, but I just put the map in here. A lot of New York, it says the range from May 1st to May 15th, but there's all the little microclimates, different areas, downstate's a little bit different. So know the right time for your area. I feel like this is probably right for last year. And as we've experienced the spring, you never know. It really seems great at 80 degrees and then it snows again, at least here in Western New York. So I kind of feel like I'm being a little conservative. So when we think about that 6 to 8 weeks that we just saw, we do our math back, and maybe for our tomatoes, we started them around April 1st. And I was looking at some of Steve Reiner's guidance, and one of the ways to think about that 6 to 8 weeks is if you have a perfect indoor setup for starting your plants, it's probably, you're going to hit the shorter time of that window. So the 6 weeks, if it's not perfect, if you don't have the greatest light, you're going to have your plants take maybe that 8-week window. So it's good to know that depending on what your equipment setup is, it might take a little bit longer time. And then there's a whole bunch of good information on your seed packet. So there's information about the row covers that we're going to look at quickly, how to transplant, how to take care of your plants once they emerge. So just really look at this carefully, whether you sow directly outdoors or you're choosing something like these tomatoes that should be started inside. Part of the ask was about hardening off plants, and Steve's got a great presentation. At about the 30-minute mark in this presentation is information on hardening those off. But if you think about your plants growing indoors, they're not ready to go directly outdoors. There's wind, there's temperature fluctuation that they're not experiencing inside. So you want to set them out gradually over a few days before actually planting them out. And then you know, if they get exposed, you bring them back in, they don't get the really cool temperatures, but you just harden them off a little bit. And damping off is another thing you want to think about when you're raising your seedlings. It's again goes back to that disease triangle. You want to set yourself up for success. And so start with clean soil when you're starting your transplants. Make sure you use warm water when you water them. Maybe use a heating pad on your plants just to keep them at that right temperature. And then if you're reusing like pots or something like that, make sure you sanitize them as recommended. So just preventing the pathogen from being present in that disease triangle. So choosing healthy transplants, these are our Freedom Gardeners in Buffalo last year getting ready to plant. And what did they look for? I think because we're low on time, I won't do the poll here, but if folks just want to say, if you would pick one of these plants, which one did you pick as the better transplant and why? So Deb's putting in the answer. And so the reason B might be the better option, I find this a little bit hard to see. It's not maybe the most perfect slide. I might have put more yellow leaves on the taller one, but you want to avoid leggy or spindly plants when you select your transplant, something that might blow in the wind and break off. So that shorter one is more compact. It should be able to get itself established in your garden well. And then, I find it hard to maybe see any disease symptoms on plant A, but there might be the tiniest bit of yellowing or flecking there. And then looking at the roots is another important piece to make sure they're not root bound. If you look at plant A, there's a lot of roots right up to the edge of that pot that you can see, where our plant B does not look like it's root bound. So those are some of the things to look at as you select plants. I think I very quickly went by a slide that just showed if you have plants in a cell, you want to separate them out carefully or clip them off when you set them out, and then set them out according to crop guidance that you might find. And this is just a quick picture of how to transplant. Water before you start, water at the end, put a little fertilizer, organic fertilizer, about 1/4 cup in the bottom of the hole, backfill gently. There's some steps for early season protection, like we talked about the wind with those new transplants. The plastic recycled soda bottles cut off can make a little greenhouse to give them a little extra boost as they get started. But you want to watch those so they don't stay on too long or the plants don't get too warm. And then similar to that, row covers are available to cover up the plants. You can use those up until the point where maybe you have a crop that needs insect pollination and you want to make sure to remove that once your crop is ready to be pollinated and have the insects visit it. But it's also a great tool, as previously mentioned, to keep off insects. So crop resistance is a good thing. Weed resistance is not a good thing. And we probably see this more with our commercial growers, but I've been working with Carrie Marshner from Dr. Tony DiTomaso's lab on a weed ID project. And so as a master gardener, you think of maybe the plant pathology lab or the insect diagnostic lab, but there really isn't a space for maybe IDing weeds, and the Weed ID Network is working for that. But they're also working with these resistant weeds where herbicide has been used over time and kind of selected for these resistant weeds to certain chemicals, which is not a good thing, because all of a sudden you thought you had a product that controlled it and then it's taking over your garden. So I'm not going to go into any more about resistance than that, but that's the bad kind of resistance. And you might encounter that as a home gardener just because plants move in the environment. There's more resources on Weed ID. And circling back to vegetable varieties, a couple years ago when we were starting the Weed ID project, somebody brought in this plant for ID. They bought a new property and they thought it was purple asparagus. And I don't know if Steve is here and can comment if we have any purple varieties of asparagus, but probably our ornamental plant lovers might recognize this as Baptisia. And so I have to admit, in my own garden, we have Baptisia next to where we grow our edibles, but this was one where our master gardeners helped this person correctly identify the plant as not being edible. And with that, I have a resource. There is purple asparagus, cool. I'm not growing it at home. And so I have a quote from my master gardener I mentioned earlier: gardening is cheaper than therapy and you get tomatoes. Hopefully if you planted tomatoes and you apply all the great things that you're learning today to grow your best crop. So, Betsy, did we have questions?
Let's see. One person did talk about with tomatoes, you can actually plant them deeper because they will root at the nodes. And that's true for tomatoes, like for the taller tomato, but not true for everything else.
Yep. And yes, I didn't include that in the slides because I had so much to cover, but that is true.
Yep. So I've been trying to put some of the resources in the links. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you, Sharon. You did a nice job of covering a lot in a short period of time, but nice and clearly. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.